Hello, welcome to the special report, your news and views program about geek gaming culture on the internet. Coming up in the show today, Spider-Man is possibly out of the Marvel Cinematic Universe after Sony and Disney can't seem to come to terms about what type of revenue each person should get, although there are now conflicting details about what exactly the conflict is actually about and if the negotiations actually did end in the first place. We're going to talk a lot about what exactly is going on. My name is Shady Shadow. This and the OC Remix track of the day starts right now. Before I go any further, please be advised that I'm working with a head cold here. I don't know where I caught it from, and it's because of that I'm going to try my best in order to formulate actual complete thoughts and try to get this out as quickly as possible in order to get my thoughts out there. So please forgive me if it sounds like I'm kind of rambling through this. I'm trying to formulate thoughts while the rest of my body is looking to the closest bed and saying that would be a nice place to flop right this second. So please forgive me for that. I will try my best, and this is a hot story, so I wanted to get this out there. And yeah, there you go. Enough of that. Let's get to the story. The Spider-Man Marvel Cinematic Universe movies, which include Far From Home, which is probably one of the best Marvel movies of a singular character I think I've watched in recent time, might not be in the Marvel Cinematic Universe all that much longer. That is because Sony Pictures and Disney Pictures, Disney of course being the main people behind the Marvel Cinematic Universe to begin with, have seemingly stopped talking to each other, and Sony is reportedly pulling everything out of the MCU, not letting Kevin Feige get his paws on the franchise. This is according to a Deadline article, and this seemingly has everything to do about money. However, there is a conflicting report that is being touted, and I'll talk about that here shortly. However, first of all, let's get to the main gist of what Deadline is reporting here, and that most of this whole idea comes from money. It always does, apparently. Disney asks, according to Deadline, that future Spider-Man films be a 50-50 co-financing arrangement between the studios, and there were discussions that this might extend to other films in the Spider-Man universe. Sony turned that offer down flat. Sources said that Sony, led by Tom Rothman and Tom Vinciquerra, I have no idea how to pronounce that name, came back with other configurations, but Disney did not want to do that. Sony did not want to share its biggest franchise with Disney, and you might say that they might have a point because Spider-Man is their highest grossing film and they kind of want some of that money too, but listen to how this broke down to begin with. That Disney did not want to continue the current terms where Marvel receives in the range of 5% of first dollar gross, according to some sources. 5% gross? They were not willing to give them more than that? It just seems like Sony wanted the entire pie. And Disney said, wait a minute, you are making a whole bunch of money on what is essentially our property. This is something that we are trying to push in forms of comics, in form of toys, in forms of merchandise. We need to get more of that money there off the movies because you're using our property in your films. And we're not going to do the same thing that we had to go through with Fox, with them not willing to play ball. They were not willing to play ball for the longest time, and they kept refusing up to the point that Disney actually bought 21st Century Fox to get those franchises back, to get X-Men back, to get Deadpool back. And maybe 50-50 might not be the best terms, maybe more like a 30-50 thing, maybe, or a 30-70 because Sony is the one making the film. Maybe that's something that could be worked out, but at the end of the day, them taking this drastic action instead of trying to play ball, and the two sides just not willing to play nice with one another, this just seems like a bad thing all around. Now, on Sony's side, this could be complete greed, that they don't want to have anything to do with Disney, but they did seem as though they were willing to give them some form of leeway, and Disney did not want that. It was a 50-50 split there or bust. And to that, maybe Disney might be more at fault there for not budging on what they wanted there. I'm not quite sure if I understand who is exactly at fault here. But the 5% is all that Disney was getting at that point in time. Even for a big conglomerate like Disney, you don't think that they deserve a little bit more since it's kind of their franchise? Maybe a little bit more of a split there? And even if Sony still gets a lot more revenue than you have, perhaps that's a little bit more attractive than the alternative here, with the movies putting Spider-Man back on the map. As far as popularity is concerned, everybody is suddenly again interested in the Spider-Man films and the character and the storyline and the backstory, the lore behind everything. The game, the PS4 game, came out to very good numbers, and it was a fantastic game all around. I mean, the franchise is doing extremely well in the back of these films, so maybe Sony felt as though maybe they need to get some of the credit. Maybe they need to get some of that revenue. Or maybe a credit in a very different way, because we're hearing now that there is a bit of conflict of the reporting of this, because those details seem to be quite confusing as to who exactly is at fault there, and maybe this might explain it. According to IO9, which is from Gizmodo, which used to be owned by Gawker, so take that for what it's worth and trust this with a bit of grain of salt here. However, this is a bit of hope here. They are tweeting, quote, "Update, a Sony rep told us it's their belief this dispute is simply over a producer credit and negotiations are ongoing." They further clarified Feige had contributed to other Spider-centric movies that he did not receive a producer credit on. Now, that leaves people to kind of speculate. First of all, if that's true, and was that true from the very start, or did Sony decide that, wait a minute, they're screwing up here, they may want to backpedal a little bit? Now, if it's the latter, then good on Sony to say, hey, wait a minute, maybe we need to come back to the table because this is not going to go over well. And in the manner of speaking, this didn't go over well, because as soon as this whole story broke, not only were there a lot of angry tweets aimed at Sony and saying this was Sony's fault, but the hashtag savespiderman is becoming one of the top trending hashtags on Twitter. Going to show you just how much is at stake here for Sony and abroad, and how much of an impact this would have for the MCU and for Sony, because look where Spider-Man could possibly be if he wasn't in the MCU, and how much Sony bungled the past Spider-Man films prior to Homecoming. And people are not dumb. They know just where the problems are going to lie. If anybody is still remembering the 2016 Ghostbusters reboot, that didn't really go over well. And guess who was at the helm of that? Yes, the same Amy Pascal, who is now one of the producers on the Spider-Man films, including Homecoming, Into the Spider-Verse, Far From Home, and Venom. And no, I'm not even going to speculate of what that would mean if this was actually about a conflict between Amy Pascal and Kevin Feige. Because if anybody remembers all the problems that people said the 2016 Ghostbusters reboot had, you will no doubt understand that that could have a whole new set of problems that could come on the back of that. So let's not even speculate on that. Let's hope to God that that is nowhere in this entire ordeal, or why there's this conflict right now. And how is this going to make any bit of sense given the cliffhanger that Far From Home gave us? And no, I am not going to spoil that for you. However, at the same time, how is all of this going to fit in given the notion that Tom Holland is slated to do 2 more Spider-Man movies? They're already contracted to be made. So how is that going to work in? Things are going to be rather confusing going into this whole thing if it turns out that they are going to just say sayonara to Disney and we're not going to give you any bit of Spider love. Were they just going to retcon that whole thing? Or are they just going to start a new timeline, which we've had enough of those? Are they just going to try to kill people off, some sort of thing, and explain away the storylines that develop from Homecoming and Far From Home? That would be very hard to work out. And keep in mind that we also have the Venom franchise that is currently ongoing, and I do believe that there's a new movie that's coming out that's going to feature Carnage. So that whole team up might not happen, or may happen as a direct result of Sony pulling out the MCU and them being able to do whatever they want to do with it. But let's assume for a minute that Sony is correct from the very start, that this was all about a producer credit, and that Kevin Feige was not credited in some Spider-Man movies. What do they mean by that? Remember that Amazing Spider-Man, the original Spider-Man, the Tobey Maguire series, those were made before the Marvel Cinematic Universe was beginning, as I recall. Maybe I'm getting it wrong, maybe I'm getting the dates wrong when they were made, but the Amazing Spider-Man series was made before, I believe, Iron Man came out. The original one, that is. So I don't think that Kevin Feige would be credited on those films. Now, I haven't watched Amazing Spider-Man at all, and I'm not thinking I'm missing out on much on that. However, if Kevin Feige is not being credited on Homecoming, and I don't remember his name being on there, I do remember his name being on Far From Home, does that mean he contributed to Into the Spider-Verse? Is that the other Spider-Man movie we're talking about here? Is that the one that is getting all the attention right now as far as these negotiations are concerned? If that's the case, then just put his name into the credits and then move on with that. Put his name into the credits and then go from there. But what credit are we talking about here? And what role would he play? Is he the executive producer? Is he the man in charge? Is he the man that is overseeing stuff? Or is he taking more of a backseat role and somebody else is saying, hey, this is what they want, this is what they need us to do, and to put some of this stuff in there in order to have it coincide with the MCU. Maybe that's the whole conflict, not whether or not he was credited at all, but in what capacity. Would he be just listed as producer, or maybe an assistant producer, or an executive producer? What sort of capacity would Kevin Feige be playing at that point? And like I said, let's hope that he would want to play a role in that. He more or less does want to play a role in that, because according to Deadline, he actually likes the Spider-Man franchise. He wants to continue working on it. So there is that. That may bring a sliver of hope, because let's be quite honest, there'll be a lot writing on this for me too. Far From Home is probably one of the best Spider-Man films, probably one of the best Spider-Man anything that I have probably seen ever since I got introduced to the character in 1995, the original Fox animated series. Now, you can say what you want about the Spider-Man animated series that appeared in 1995, but that was my first introduction into the character, and while there was a lot of censorship that went into that cartoon, it accurately represented Peter Parker's life as it was in the comics. They pulled a lot of different storylines from the comics into one cartoon, and it was my first exposure to the Spider-Man lore, and people can actually relate to what Peter Parker goes through, the juggling of his real life versus that of a superhero, or juggling major elements of his life, having to try to work things out, have to multitask, and seemingly no matter what happens, no matter what he tries to do, something always tends to go wrong. And I really enjoyed Far From Home. I watched a good bit of Homecoming. I think I missed the first act of Homecoming, but no one can deny the quality of these movies, especially the acting of Tom Holland as Spider-Man, of course, and Jake Gyllenhaal as Mysterio, Quentin Beck in Far From Home. I even enjoyed Zelena being Mary Jane. That is an interesting take on the character. I do appreciate the fact that they took a chance on that, and it's actually working. I do actually like her in that role. She does seem like she knows the character well. She knows what she's doing in that role, and she plays the role really well. And I do like the chance that they're taking with the character outside of her playing that role, and the different take on the events leading up to what eventually happens. and I am awaiting what they do with it from there. When will the Kingpin come into play? How will other Spider-Man villains be represented? What about Chameleon or Electro or Rhino? Or what if Venom does decide to come into the MCU in some form of fashion? What if Sony decides, if this is true and they decide that they are going to come to terms in some form of fashion, if Venom would actually become a part of the MCU? That would have to happen too. And if Spider-Man was taken out of the MCU, that means that there's not going to be any crossovers, and you would need a crossover in order to bring Blade into the Spider-Man universe because of Morbius. And of course, what about the Green Goblin, one of Spider-Man's most feared nemesis, alongside Doc Ock, who they already did a good job of in the game. Without the input of both Sony and Disney, that might not be even half as good. Maybe those two need to work together in order to make the perfect Spider-Man films. And I would hate to see this go down in this way, and thankfully there is a slimmer of hope. Maybe this is all about perhaps some production credit that needs to be put in there in some form or fashion. And if that's the case, just do it. Just get it over with, because here's the thing. These are major conglomerates. We're not in their heads when they do these negotiations. They're not looking at like, hey, what are the fans going to think about this? Are people going to want to see this if we step out? If we decide, hey, we don't want to be part of the MCU anymore? Now, Kevin Feige in the MCU, they might be able to handle things without Spider-Man in the MCU. But keep in mind that Spider-Man right now is seemingly slated to become the new leader of the Avengers. They're kind of hinting about him being in that role, and that's not to say that that's a spoiler for Far From Home, because you could probably tell already that he's being groomed into that role from Endgame and stuff like that. It would be tough, but I think they might be able to handle that. Sony, on the other hand, kind of needs Spider-Man to be part of the MCU right now, because we have seen what Sony is not able to do without the MCU, is create a good Spider-Man film. And yeah, you can say that Venom was successful, and even though that was a good film, I had a bit of problems with it. For instance, the whole scene where Eddie Brock gets the symbiote when he's in that prison is extremely seizure inducing. I'm not sure how Sony was able to get away with that scene without having another incident like The Incredibles 2 or Twilight Breaking Dawn Part 1. I'm wondering if I'm the only one that had said something about that particular scene, or if they fixed something about that scene. But I think maybe that is the confidence builder they needed in order to say, maybe we don't need the MCU. But I think Sony does need the MCU for the main Spider-Man franchise, because a lot of people know what who Spider-Man is. He's kind of a household name. Venom, not so much. Hardcore Spider-Man fans will know who Venom is, who Carnage is. And yes, we would love for Venom and Carnage to be a part of the MCU as well. I would love for them to get on that. Am I expecting it to happen? Not so much. So Spider-Man needs to be in the MCU, and Sony and Disney need to get on that. They need to stop pussyfooting around and get to that, because if they do not, then there's going to be some rocky roads ahead. Not to mention that those really successful and really good quality films, those are going to be a thing in the past. They're going to be relics of what could have been going forward. So yeah, Disney, Sony, work out whatever you're doing and get on this. Think about what we're going to think, because we would love those crossovers to continue. We would love to see Spider-Man continue to be a part of the MCU and to head the Avengers in whatever new Avengers, pun not intended, they will be on. That's going to do it for this edition of the Special Report. Thanks as always for watching, and thank you so much for understanding about this head cold, because boy, it is wrecking me right now. Before I go any further, please allow me to indulge you with the OC remix track of the day, as we are continuing on the musics that Total Biscuit used in his shows. This is the second out of the sale box mix that he used. This is The Sound of the Galaxy, which is coming from a arranging of 5 songs from Mass Effect 2. This is from Matthias Hagestrom Gert. I hope I am pronouncing your name right, because if not, then you could probably just kill me in my sleep while I go try to sleep off this head cold now. Thank you very much for tolerating my voice through this head cold, and yeah, I will see you next time. My name is Shady Shadow, and that just happened.